This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair Jenny Ifft begins today's show discussing the legacy of Barry Flinchbaugh and how the new center and her position will interact. Continuing the show is Melanie Derby and Gaurav as they share about their research in microbial innovations for climate-resilient agriculture. We are then joined by Dennis McKinney, State Director of Kansas FSA, for a quick update. Due to varying conditions in the fields, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk completes the show by encouraging producers to monitor kernel damage several times per day while chopping corn silage. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show discussing the new Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag Policy. And then to talk about it, we have K-State's Jenny Ifft, who is the Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair and will be interacting with the center. Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So a new center was recently announced, the Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag Policy. And so before we jump into this conversation, could you tell us a little bit about Barry Flinchbaugh?
For anybody that ever met Barry Flinchbaugh at least once, you can't forget him. He was a great storyteller, and he's great at clearly explaining different concepts in agricultural policy in a way that you could really remember it. And he taught undergraduate agricultural policy at Kansas State for 49 years. So the first day that I taught agricultural policy here in 2021, my dental assistant said her grandpa took agricultural policy with Barry Flinchbaugh. So deep legacy in the state, taught multiple generations of students. He was a beloved teacher, educator, mentor. He was involved in several farm bills. He had a really strong network of people working in agricultural policy. He worked with politicians across several years, across different parties. He was always happy to work across party lines. He was a really strong supporter of Kansas agriculture and of, the people that worked in agriculture and lived in rural areas.
Being such a supporter is probably one of the many reasons that the Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag Policy was just recently announced. And Jenny, could you tell us a little bit more about it?
The center was announced 2 weeks ago, so a lot of listeners may have seen a press release about that. It's going to be a freestanding organization that works in partnership with the K-State Office of Engagement. They're really interested in student engagement, also working with stakeholders in agriculture and their supply chains to identify innovative solutions to current and future challenges facing agriculture in rural communities.
And Jenny, you're serving as the Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair. And so before we talk about what your role really does, what is a chair in this respect?
Well, I think the Flinchbaugh Chair, because of Barry's legacy and the importance of ag policy to the state of Kansas, it carries a lot of weight. But at first, I'd like to address just what the idea of a chair is, or a chaired professorship. So, like any job, there's rankings. You start as assistant, you move to associate, and then you move to professor. And on top of that, you can get a chaired or a named professorship. And that's a title, it's a platform, it's an honor, in this case, especially to have the Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair. But in general, it can help with recruiting outstanding faculty. It helps the department, in whatever the chair is named in, it helps the department, be a leader, have leadership in that area into the future. So it's really a way to strengthen the research and extension in a particular area. At the university, there's usually a small amount of resources associated to help the chairholder achieve those objectives.
And so what does it mean for you to be a Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair?
So at a high level, it's sort of a responsibility to make sure that I am doing research, generating knowledge, and conducting extension and educational programs that are going to empower solutions to our current and future agricultural policy challenges. And that that term, sort of empowering solutions, we don't come up with the solutions usually. I mean, sometimes people are developing technologies, but we're really helping producers, stakeholders, policymakers have the best information, the best research that's available to make decisions, and also developing leaders.
It sounds like a lot of work going into it. And so what are a few things that you're excited to continue to do in this position?
Well, over the next year, I'm going to have an industry advisory board, and I'm going to work with the center to do that. We're working really hard to make sure that we're coordinating and partnering together to identify key priorities for the chair. But there are a couple areas that have come across as really important. The first is undergraduate education. We have an outstanding program called the Flinchbaugh Food and Agricultural Policy Fellows. That places Kansas students at K-State in a Kansas organization. So it could be Farm Bureau, it could be one of the commodity groups. It gives them a work experience, an internship in Kansas, and then they have the option to go to D.C., and it supports them throughout that process. So we want to, help further support them, help them get the mentoring and the support they need, especially in Washington, D.C. And so I'd be working with the center and the fellows board to do that. We also just generally want to support students who want to have policy careers in D.C., so put some resources into that. Also, within the agricultural economics department, we want to make sure that the opportunities to specialize in agricultural policy. So we want to elevate and strengthen the available options that students have to study agricultural policy to get, say, a minor or a certification or a specialization in that. So that's going to be one of the priorities over the next couple of years. Again, this is not going to be just the chair. I'll be working with the fellows board, with the center to do this. In terms of extension and outreach, the Farm Bill series is really a part of what I do as a chair. I'll be doing some policy updates for different groups over the course of the next year. Doing a series over the next year to highlight what Barry did to inform agricultural policy to help bring people together, but what different professors, researchers, and extension professionals in agricultural economics have done both historically and today to help to address different challenges related to agricultural policy. On the research side, I'm doing a lot of applied research that does address current and future challenges. So, trying to understand the effectiveness of forage safety net products, some which are quite new. I'm studying how often and why farmland turns over in Kansas. That has a lot of policy implications. I'm asking questions about how effective it is to use crop insurance to target conservation practice adoption. So, again, trying to make sure that the research I do, both myself and in collaboration with people in the department, is really focused on current and future challenges.
Sounds like a lot of Flinchbaugh's legacy kind of coming together to hopefully create a good support system for agriculture in Kansas, but then also the country.
Yeah. Let's say, we're definitely, this idea of K-State 105, that K-State's having an impact in all counties. That's definitely a focus, but it's hard to find a problem in Kansas, say, irrigation water availability, that's just a Kansas problem. Crop insurance is used nationwide. It's very important for Kansas agriculture. So, it's hard to find a problem that just applies to your state. So a lot of that happens naturally.
Jenny, you are currently the Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair. However, if you were to decide to leave at some point, does that chair stay where it currently is?
The chair is a permanent endowment for the Department of Agricultural Economics. So the idea is that there will always be a chairholder. So, I plan on having this role. I'm going to be an ex officio board member, and I'm going to work with the center. The idea is the next chair and the chair after that would do this.
Continuing that legacy on, and as we talked about, impacting Kansas and impacting agriculture, how do you see this all impacting that?
I like to define policy as being about how government at different levels solves shared problems. And in agriculture, whether we like it or not, we have a lot of shared problems. Some of these are physical problems. We talked about declining water availability. Some of them are about shared values. So having a safe, affordable food supply, including for people who can't afford it. That's a part of food and agricultural policy. We care about the vitalities of rural areas. There's continued debate over the farm safety net. There's increased spending for conservation, which deals with a lot of, shared problems with natural resources and agriculture. So, a lot of policy-related issues in Kansas. And, there's a political process. So what shared problems should government address and how should we address them? There's always going to be that part of policy. But, as I see the role of a land grant, Kansas State is a next generation land grant. is that it's easier to find solutions when you have a common set of facts, when you understand the impacts of different policy options. When you have that understanding of shared problems, it's easier to address the political side.
And Jenny, as we wrap up today's conversation, what are you excited for as you move forward in this position?
Well, the enthusiasm that people have and the expectations around the legacy of Barry Flinchbaugh, it's really motivating to me. And, the people that you get together that want to help K-State continue to be a leadership in this area is really motivating for me.
That was Kansas State University's Jenny Ifft, who is currently the Flinchbaugh Agriculture Policy Chair. We were discussing how she would interact with the new Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag Policy that was recently announced. If you'd like to read a news release on this topic, I'll link one in today's show notes titled K-State Announces New Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag Policy. Also in today's show notes will be a link to a survey. The survey is something undergraduate research students in the Department of Communication and Agricultural Education at Kansas State University are conducting. This research is to understand the demographics and preferences of Ag Today listeners. Participation from every listener is voluntary and should take less than 5 minutes. This survey will close on September 15th. Once again, that link can be found in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Gaurav and Melanie Derby as they discuss a recent grant they've received from the National Science Foundation to conduct research in understanding more microbial innovations for climate-resilient agriculture. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now with a discussion about a recent grant from the National Science Foundation. And then to talk about it, we have Associate Professor in Mechanical and Nuclear Engineering, Melanie Derby, and Assistant Professor of Agronomy, Gaurav. Gaurav, Melanie, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So this recent grant, Melanie, can you tell us a bit about it?
So this is a grant by the National Science Foundation. We're looking at climate resilience and particularly resilience to drought, and we're going to use microbes to help us preserve soil moisture.
So how is your process of going about doing this work?
I think one of the neat things is about 5 years ago, we won a different grant from the National Science Foundation, and some of the work we did in that grant with different graduate students kind of laid the foundation for this one. So it's pretty exciting to be building off some of our previous work and momentum in that area.
$3 million, quite a bit of money towards hoping to excel and work into this area of study. And so are you planning on doing work in greenhouses, fields, or a little bit of everything?
So yeah, there's a plan to do the study on different scales. We'll start a lab-based study and develop the protocol where we are translating the research into the greenhouse and have all the aspects with soil matrix as well as growing plants over the time and then applying that to the field scale. I mean, there are issues with the drought all over the state. So that's what our targeted field areas would also be in the southwestern Kansas, where we are partnering with Dr. Jonathan Aguilar, and we will be conducting trials in the field scale eventually.
So this is a 4-year process. And so kind of what are the steps as you work through those years?
Over the 4-year process, we will be initiating with microbial interventions in the laboratory and do some column experiments and assess the water use efficiency, how it's impacting the soil, and then translate the same, as I said, in the greenhouse and see how it's impacting the plant on the individual scale. Once that model is developed, that is done, we will translate that to the field and assess the water use efficiency in year 3 and 4. On the field scale, across the space in a field, monitoring the evapotranspiration. That means how much water is being lost by the plants over the scale, how much water is being held in the soil in that particular field.
What are you hoping that once the 4 years is up, you walk away with?
I think this provides us a really nice opportunity to get field scale data. We have some preliminary lab scale data, but as you know, there are a lot more variables when you start scaling up. And so I think we're really excited to see the scale. We're also collaborating with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Langston University in Oklahoma. And so we're able to get, I think, a sense in the central high plains of how these microbes might function. And so that's, I think, very exciting to us.
So the goal is to optimize those uses in the field. I mean, this project would not be useful only for the irrigated agriculture, but would also be important to optimize the resources for the dryland agricultural aspects of the state.
You both have mentioned some people and places you might also be working with, but there are more people and places than that, correct?
Yes, we are happy to have, I think, a really strong team at K-State, and we comprise of people from multiple colleges, right? So this is really, I think, a lot of people coming together. One of our co-PIs, Gabe Sampson, is in agricultural economics. We have Deborah Bolton, who is a geographer. Ganga Hederachi is in agronomy, working with Gaurav. Then we also have Jonathan Aguilar at Southwest Research and Extension Center. And we have Ryan Hansen in chemical engineering, who kind of cultivates our microbes.
Why do you find this project important to agriculture?
Again, everything comes down to water. I mean, any project currently that I'm working on or planning on, it's like the questions are more driven from growers that I'm interacting with, and the issues are water in most of major counties, particularly in Southwest. And I would say not just the drought, but there's like depletion of Ogallala aquifer that's happening, and it's not like recent issue. We have been dealing with this over the years. So I think this research would contribute towards optimizing the water use efficiency in the agricultural crops that are irrigated, particularly in the southwestern Kansas and regions in Nebraska and Oklahoma that depend on the aquifer for water management for the agricultural crops. So I think that is the prime importance. My research area is on precision agriculture, so that excites me about the project, that there will be an assessment on a spatial scale. We will be able to understand how different soil properties like organic matter or the fertility is integrated with as we incorporate the soil microbes into the system, and then how it's assessed on a spatial scale to understand the water use of the plants.
And these microbes are naturally present in soil. So we're not taking something that doesn't belong in soil. We're just trying to amplify and cultivate something that's already in soils.
Do you see application for this then around the country and possibly the world?
I think there's a lot of semi-arid regions and areas where water is an ongoing question for their future.
I came from Montana, and right then the state was under drought. Before that, I was in California. The state was under extreme drought, and there were lots of issues among the growers how to use water. So, I mean, places that I have been before, I totally see the direct impact that the results could be for in those states too.
What makes you excited to put in that time and effort?
I think it really matters to the state of Kansas, right? This is an issue of local importance, but it's also important globally, as we said. And I think as a land grant institution, we really want to be working on problems that are very relevant to our state.
I started here in January, so the excitement of great collaborations with the team, with diverse team here at K-State, and also working as we scale up the project, I get an opportunity to collaborate with the growers here. So I'm pretty excited about those kind of opportunities and identify more projects to work on.
Melanie, is there anything else you'd like to add for producers?
Our social science team is going to be surveying growers at some point in time, and, we could appreciate your responses, right? We're really trying to make this relevant and useful.
That was K-State's Melanie Derby and Gaurav Jha. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by the State Director of Kansas FSA, Dennis McKinney. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're adding in this quick little part to kind of update producers. We've had a lot of heat and humidity, which the Kansas Farm Service Agency has some things to hopefully help producers who may be experiencing loss due to those conditions. And so, Dennis, what information can you share with producers?
The Farm Service Agency has reviewed the market data. We realize that the Livestock Indemnity Program is designed to reflect about 75% of the prior year's average fair market value. We had not kept up with that because of rapid increases in livestock prices, especially cattle prices. So that has been updated now for 800-pound calves, beef calves over 800 pounds and over. That rate has increased from $1,244 per head up to $1,618 per head. That's an increase of $374 per head. It's about a 30% increase. What we're seeing is those values have jumped way up, and they've jumped up rapidly because of drought in prior years. We've had some major cow herd liquidation, and so because there are fewer numbers on hand, those numbers of drop markets are up, and we changed our numbers to more accurately reflect that and help producers who have suffered a catastrophic loss because of the weather.
These numbers aren't meant to cover maybe the whole cost of the animal, but just to help producers some.
That's right. We try to aim to cover about 75% of that fair market value. Not designed to remove all risk, not designed to cover all costs. It is designed to blunt the impact of a catastrophic loss to help producers stay in business. We've had this recent abnormally hot weather, not just abnormally hot, but abnormally humid, high humidity going along with it, particularly in eastern and especially in northeastern Kansas and north central Kansas. We've seen that. We've had reports of some major losses of cattle that were starting to do fall calving, but also cattle in feed yards or cattle that were on feed, even on farm locations. And so that's why it makes this announcement even more important to producers in Kansas.
If producers think this program would be beneficial for them, do they need to go in and see if they qualify with the FSA office?
I always urge people to contact their local FSA office, the local USDA Service Center. You can also go to farmers.gov. You'll find information on there as well. But I urge people, you best help. Our folks, those service centers, really like to take care of producers. Go talk to them and see what you need, what records you need to bring in. Like I said, you'll have to meet our eligibility requirements, but most of our producers have already done that, and they can go in and see what paperwork they need to file for the Livestock Indemnity Program.
Dennis, as we're giving producers a quick update with programs through the Farm Service Agency, one more thing for us to mention is that a few more counties in Kansas are now qualifying for livestock forage programs.
That's right. Some of the counties that never did qualify last year, that were not in severe drought last year, are now entering that severe drought. Drought has moved from western Kansas more into central and eastern Kansas. So we have some counties that have now been in either D3 or D4 drought, or they were in a D2 drought for 8 consecutive weeks that now qualify for the livestock forage program payments because of impact on grazing. And check that out at your local FSA office or go to farmers.gov and check that one out. One more thing, quick thing I'd add on the livestock indemnity program. If you've already filed a claim, this increase in the rates will be applied retroactively and automatically. So check with your office on that, but it should be applied retroactively to January 1 of 2023.
Dennis, I appreciate you joining us today to give us this quick update on programs through the Farm Service Agency.
We appreciate the help. Like I said, we get to partner with the world's best farmers and ranchers to make good things happen and provide a safe and abundant food supply.
That was the State Director of Kansas FSA, Dennis McKinney. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Due to the wide range of dry matters out in the fields this year, farmers as they chop corn silage are encouraged to monitor the amount of kernel damage several times per day. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says this monitoring enables producers to make adjustments during chopping and to be more aware of the starch availability in the silage when it's fed at a later date.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning monitoring the kernel processing as you chop your corn silage. You know, when we miss processing the kernels in our corn silage correctly, we really miss the effect of making that starch available to your herd for the next year or however long that you might be feeding the 2023 crop. So as you chop, it's important that you monitor the kernel processing actually several times a day. It would be important to probably take a look at kernel processing at least every hour as you chop through fields. This year is going to be tremendously difficult because we have a wide range of dry matters out in the field, and as you chop through some of those drier patches, those kernels are going to be more mature, they're going to be harder, going to be more difficult to process. So you really do need to monitor continually, again, at least every hour. If you know you're going into a field that is drier than what you have been chopping, you need to really monitor that from the start to make sure that you're still getting adequate processing. So what's the easiest way to determine whether or not you have adequate processing? Really the easiest way is to grab a 32-ounce cup and grab a cup full of silage. And you can have a 5-gallon bucket of water handy there. About half full is really about all you need. Dump the material into the bucket and just simply skim off the leaves and sticks and everything that float on top. And down below at the bottom of the bucket, you'll have the whole kernels and partial kernels. So as you look at those particles in the bottom of the bucket, be aware that if we have more than 2 or 3 pieces that are half kernel or more, we need to squeeze the rolls of the chopper down just a little bit tighter. As we look at starch availability, there is a high degree of correlation between the amount of kernel damage that we get as we chop our silage and the eventual starch availability of the crop that you'll be feeding to your animals. So, monitoring on a regular basis as you chop is very, very important. This duty should be assigned to someone on the farm, so it's done on a regular basis. Some of our farms, we also grab a sample and run a dry matter every time we look at kernel processing. This allows us to keep track of where the actual dry matter of material going into the silo is running. Not that we can probably make any significant adjustments, but at least we have an idea of what we're putting into our bag or pit or our drive-over pile. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, reminding our dairy farmers that as we chop corn silage, it's very, very important that we monitor the amount of kernel damage that we're getting so that we have adequate starch availability when we feed that crop at a later date.
Thanks, Mike. In agricultural news, the Agriculture Department has announced its latest efforts to help financially distressed borrowers in Farm Service Agency farm loan programs. Rod Bain has more.
Since August of last year, the Agriculture Department has issued financial assistance to more than 20,000 distressed borrowers of Farm Service Agency loans, $1.15 billion in assistance, including this recent announcement.
We're announcing that we will provide qualifying distressed guaranteed loan borrowers with assistance similar to what was already provided to those distressed direct loan borrowers back last fall.
FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneau says this is part of efforts to keep borrowers farming and improve USDA's approach to loan and financing services in the long term. Additional information about program applications, qualifications, and tax implications are available through local Farm Service Agency offices or online at farmers.gov.
And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.